and welcome to another session at the Bengal Club. So this session is called the Writers' Postcards, Writers' Dispatches, where Dipika Mukherjee and Diya Kohli on travel writing is in conversation with Seema Mohanchandran. So whilst I introduce the panelists, they can come on stage. So Dipika Mukherjee's collection of travel essays, Writers' Postcards, was published in October 2023. Her work is included in the Best Small Fictions 2019 and appears in many prestigious journals and magazines. She has been translated into French, Portuguese, Bengali, and Mandarin Chinese. She is the author of the novel Shambhala Junction, which won the Virginia Prize for Fiction, and Ode to Broken Things, which was longlisted for the Man Asia Literary Prize, as well as the story collection Rules of Desire. Her latest poetry collection, Dialect of Distant Harbors, won the Quill and Ink Award. She has received numerous grants and fellowship and has taught in the United States, in India, China, the Netherlands, Malaysia, and Singapore. She was a distinguished professor of linguistics at Shanghai International Studies University, affiliated fellow of the International Institute of Asian Studies in Leiden and the Netherlands, and affiliated to Roberta Buffet Center for Global Studies at Northwestern University in USA. She is currently co-faculty at Story Studio Chicago and teaches at the Graham School at University of Chicago. If you could give her a round of applause, please. Next, we have Diya Kohli, who is currently the features director at Condé Nast Traveler India. Her 15-year career as a journalist and editor has reported on a variety of topics for newspapers and magazines across India. Her work focuses on India's diversity and cultural heritage told via stories of food, people, and the places they belong to. She shuttles between Kolkata and Mumbai and is happiest exploring old streets and new places. If you could give a round of applause for her as well. And lastly, we have Seema Mohanchandran, who started her career with the Taj Group in 1990 as a management trainee in Mumbai. An alumnus of Delhi University, where she majored in English literature, she has worked across all hotel functions in multiple locations with the Taj Group, from Chennai to New Delhi to Mumbai and Sydney, where she set up the group's first regional sales and reservations office. Her experience also includes time with Emirates in their holidays division. Post her role at Taj Bengal, where she spent 6 years, she moved to Hyderabad in May 2015 as region for Taj as corporate director of sales. She then moved to head public relations for the southern region for the Taj Group. And since February 2019, she has taken a back seat from the corporate world to pursue her personal interest, which is primarily caring for street animals, which includes sterilization of street dogs in particular. A self-confessed animal enthusiast, she and her husband Mohan have 8 pets, 4 dogs, including a paraplegic one, who they have rescued from the streets of Udaipur, and 4 cats. Her interests include photography and travel and writing, the occasional piece, more for self-reflection than for print. If you could have her as well. Oh, please round of applause for her. Before we start the session, we would like to unveil ma'am's book. We would like to unveil the book of Writers' Postcards, Writers' Dispatches. This book is also available at the bookstore, and you can definitely buy it and have it signed.
evening, everyone. I'm really thrilled to be talking to these wonderful ladies. And travel writing or travelogues, in a manner of speaking, travel writing has been around for centuries. Think back to the earliest epics, the Odyssey, where Homer is recounting tales from a journey. In a sense, perhaps, the Ramayana too is an account of a travel across the subcontinent and the adventures that befall the characters. A name also so well known to all, Marco Polo, and his travels and travel writings. So many other travelers that came to India, and most of us are familiar with them, whether it's Bernier, Albari, Tavernier, Ibn Battuta, someone very close to us. I think as children, most of us grew up sort of hearing stories about Ibn Battuta's travels. So having said that, let me start with you, Deepika. What led to this love of travel and, the way you write about your journey? Tell us something about that.
Yeah, thank you. Let me just start with thanking the audience for being here. It's an absolute delight to be in Kolkata as a Bengali and speaking to a bunch of people from Kolkata. So thank you for coming. I think, Seema, the question about the start of my travel, it was actually not initiated by me because my father was a diplomat. My father, Kalidas Mukherjee, was an IFS person, and when I was 6 months old, my father was posted to Geneva, Switzerland. And French turned out to be one of my first languages because I was humming tunes like Au clair de la lune and all that, even before I learned a lot of Bengali rhymes and things. So it's really, I grew up thinking it was absolutely normal to live in a country for 3 years, to be posted there, and then come back home to India for some deprogramming, and then go again for 3 years. That was kind of my life, and I reveled in it, and I enjoyed the new adventures and things like that, because when you're a child, you're not dealing with any of the logistics. But of course, leaving friends behind was the only bad thing. So that's how it all started. And when I got married, I chose my husband, and one of the criteria was that he must also love to travel. So we've been traveling together.
Yes, your book kind of represents that very well. But you also write about your first solo traveler when you ran away to the ghats of Benares. Tell us something about that. That was actually quite funny.
Yes, it is a story that I often read out when people sort of say what made you start traveling solo. The answer is actually quite short and succinct. It was a fight with my mother. So I was in Kolkata, and I had this fight with my mother, and all of you, who are mothers and daughters, you know how this relationship can often be fraught with things that are completely inconsequential. And I had to run off somewhere, and Benares was the closest place I could go to. And there in Benares, I just sort of found this love for being on my own. And those of you who have been to Benares already know this. There's just something amazingly timeless about the city, and it envelops you in an embrace, and that's what it did to me, and it made me fall in love with just traveling on my own time without being answerable to anyone at all.
So Diya, coming to you, you write a lot about cultural heritage. And what inspired this in you? How did you get, so deeply entrenched in writing about this aspect of travel in particular?
So again, I came to travel, I think, not by chance, but I was a student of literature, and like many children growing up in Calcutta, my first interaction with travel was through books, and it was armchair traveling, whether it was across the world in colonial England, whether it was Bibhuti Bhushan's travels in Bengal and beyond. that was my first window into travel, and it was this world of books and the new worlds elsewhere that had opened up that sort of made me move towards my first job, which was actually related to books. So I started working in publishing. And then while I was doing that, I remember I went on one trip to Melbourne. And while I was there, I was like, there were lots of things that I did, lots of things I experienced. And then I felt that I wanted to write about this. And I had written a fair bit before that. I had moonlighted as a journalist in my student days. My first job was as a rookie journalist in Telegraph. And at that point, when I was editing other people's books, I felt that I also wanted to write. And I started writing about my personal holidays, and they usually ended up having some kind of a theme. Like my holiday to Melbourne was centered around looking for the old shops that sold vinyl records, and it became a vinyl tour around Melbourne. And that's what I wrote about, and that piece appeared in National Geographic Traveller India, and one piece led to another, and all this while I was still balancing the two jobs. And then I realized that, okay, so I like writing, I like words, and I like travel, so let me give this a shot. And that's how I sort of moved into my first job, which was with National Geographic Traveller India. And it was bringing these two worlds together. Once I joined that magazine, I discovered something very quickly, that all the people on the team, you all bring a particular, everyone brought a particular focus and a particular area of interest to the magazine. Somebody loved food, somebody loved music, somebody was interested in art, somebody was interested in history. Your personal stories, your context, your upbringing, your likes, your dislikes had a role to play in what you sort of wrote about. And our trips were sort of designed around people's interests. And so my early days in Nat Geo Traveller were really interesting because I was interested in history, because I was interested in heritage, architecture, all of those things. I ended up going to places like Jerusalem. So, you know, it was something. I ended up going to places like Egypt. So it sort of fit in, and that sort of became a focus area, and that became also an entry point for me into a lot of places. And that, I think, continues till date. Whether I write about food, whether I talk about a new hotel, there's always an aspect of history or the heritage of where that restaurant or that hotel is located in that comes in to the writing of it.
Yes, that's quite true. I do read some of your articles, and you know, you sort of bring a restaurant alive, not just talking about the food, but you delve into the history of that food, maybe some old recipes or where that recipe may have originated from. And I think that's what sort of entices a reader to go and try a new place or, you know, look at a new hotel. Now, you said that your travels took you to places like Jerusalem and Egypt and, you know, fancy places. That sounds like a very, very glamorous job. And, you know, what is reality, actually?
No, it's not always that glamorous. I won't complain. It is a job that I absolutely love. And I feel blessed at a lot of times to be able to do that which I love for a living. But the reality is that as a travel writer, you spend a lot of time at your desk, a lot of it. And a lot of our travels, which sound very slow and meditative and full of stillness, actually happen over 24 hours, 48 hours, over weekends, over holidays. We explore a place in 36 hours. We will tell you to spend 3 weeks there. But it's also something that I remember Pico Iyer had once written, that when you are traveling, every hour expands and the day seems endless. So you somehow seem to have boundless energy when you're traveling. And that's something I've seen over and over again. So there was this piece I did 2 years ago when I was in Landor near Missouri. Yes. And it's a place built for stillness. It's a place built for quiet, calm walks that you take, which are sort of never-ending. It's a place built for contemplating the trees and all of that. And that's why so many writers have made Landor their home. I spent 24 hours in Landor, and I met, I think, about 25 people in those 24 hours, had endless conversations. They're like, I will sleep less, I will sit less, I will find my moment of stillness at 1 o'clock in the morning, but I am going to explore Landor, see everything that there is to it, and be able to draw a certain essence out of that place, which I can then mull over and chew over on my long flight back home. And that's the case with a lot of places.
No, I think that's beautiful. And, you know, being in hospitality myself for so many years, I always was thrown this that, oh, you work in this fancy hotel, you must be eating in the restaurants every day. Yes, right, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Absolutely not. I'd be sick, to my stomach if I had to do that. But, in your case, Deepika, your travels are mostly of your own choosing. You know, in her case, it's more about a destination that needs to be written about and, all the research that goes into it. In your case, it was more your choosing of where you went. And as you said, you were a following spouse on 2 occasions, I think. And then you found something to do there. So tell us a little something about, how you chose a destination where you wanted to go and write or live?
I think what they put on the copy of this book is that it's the story of a flaneuse. And those of you who know the word, it's just basically a French word from the French flaneur, somebody who just likes to stand around and idle and watch world go by. So in my case, what happened is because of the kinds of writing residencies that I chose, very often the writing residencies would be in places that were very remote. Like in Brazil, it was an island, just off the coast. And I would have to sort of spend a lot of time meditating on whatever book I was writing. All my manuscripts have been finished like that, in a very meditative residency. But I think the other thing that also, though, took me to places have been work. And one of the reasons that I wanted to write this book is I was in a lot of these international festivals where there were absolutely no women of color writing about travel or talking about travel. Even today, if you kind of just Google best travel writing, it will be Paul Theroux, it will be Bill Bryson. You will not find your Indian names or brown people at all. And I think the turning point came in Bali when I was at a literary festival in Bali. And most of the students out there were, of course, Indonesians and brown. But the travel panel out there was completely white Caucasians. And I was like, why are we telling the students of today that the only people who can write about travel or even maybe be traveling are white people? We should just go way beyond it, especially because I just meet so many women who are traveling on their own, people who are expats like we were and can write about it. So that was really something that I wanted to do, to write about Indian people, brown people who are traveling despite the challenges. I still have an Indian passport, I still have to line up for visas, and I still travel.
That's fantastic. So, that leads me to another point. Deepika, your essays, your travels are all about personal journeys. And from there, the people you meet and you also talk of a lot of issues of international stature, be it the suicide of the Surinamese Hindus in Netherlands, or be it the poetry of the migrant workers, which I think was very, very poignant. And I was extremely touched reading some of those verses. And therefore, I think because this is a personal account, you can be bold in stating your point of view without really, worrying too much about the repercussions. And I'm sure there must have been some criticism coming from, some people of stature or whatever, people who want to believe that they're people of stature. But Diya, in your case, you have a huge responsibility to your readers. So often when you travel, do you face the situation where you want to write about your personal experience, but you also know that you have a reader and to who you need to, communicate a certain bit. How do you manage this sort of dichotomy or dichotomy in your thoughts, maybe?
There are two parts to this. So one part is picking up on what Deepika mentioned about how a lot of travel writing is still very dominated by this white male gaze. And writing of places even in India, South Asia, Southeast Asia is still written from that sort of perspective of the explorer coming to foreign lands and discovering it for the first time. So for a magazine like ours, which is across markets, it is in the UK, the US, a lot of the writers who have been writing about places in this region have unfortunately been white people and not people of color, and very few women. So one of the responsibilities we have as writers from India is definitely to sort of change that discourse, change the writing of India, change the writing of places in India, and bring in our voices into it. Remove that sort of exotic lens, which you'd be surprised that in 2023 still exists. Till date, if you look at pieces, long-form pieces written on Kolkata in foreign magazines, travel magazines across the world, they're still pieces which are stuck in another era where they talk about the beautiful decade. It's still all about Dominic Lepierre's Kolkata. There is nothing that is forward-looking, and there's nothing that is about the city as it exists today. It is about a person sort of parachuting into this city and being overwhelmed by the color, the grit, the grime, the typical scenes under the Howrah Bridge, and that very cliched representation, which sometimes is very, very exotic for a foreign reader, perhaps. And so a big part of that responsibility to readers in India and beyond is to change that representation of the cities that we belong to. That's one very, very big part of it. The other part of it, of course, as a travel writer is, and a journalist, of course, first, is the fact that it's one of the things we learnt back in university, which is show, not tell. So everything that you wish to express in terms of whether there are inequalities in a particular place, whether there is a particular social structure that exists, it is by having those conversations, by reporting those conversations. I am sometimes just a fly on the wall. At other points, I'm someone who writes exactly as I see it. You walk with me, and as you walk with me, you see what I see. You see the contrasts, you see the color, you see the differences between people, you see what they eat in a particular place vis-a-vis what we eat. I am not providing you my opinion at that point. I'm showing you as it exists there, whether it is in the Northeast, whether it is in Bengal, whether it is in North Bengal, whether it is in Chhattisgarh. You're simply walking with me as I am discovering these places, and we are talking to those people. And that is what the rest is left up to you to understand. I'm not here to preach, I'm not here to give you my opinions, and that wouldn't be right by me as a journalist to do. So I think that is primarily what one keeps in mind while writing. A is to, of course, obviously reclaim this discourse while writing in English about places and people, especially in this region. And the other part is, of course, being true to that which you see and reporting it as is. And the third part, for working for a travel magazine which has an audience which is of a particular demographic, they are a particular kind of traveler, the ultimate objective of a piece is also to make it user-friendly in a particular way. So if I am writing this beautifully meditative piece about a Jaipur or wherever it is in the country, I will give you some bits at the end that this is where you should stay if you are interested in history. This is where you should stay if all you want is like a spa holiday. This is where you should eat, whether you want to eat kachoris for breakfast, whether you want to have like a champagne brunch. So there's a slight element which is there tucked in somewhere so that you can also plan your holiday around this itinerary. So I think that pretty much is how we
Absolutely. And I think, like you rightly said, the magazine has a very high respect in its field, and I think a lot of people read it and use it as a sort of basis of where they want to travel next. So yes, in that sense, guiding them, although subtly, discreetly, not like a guidebook, tuck, 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 do this, do that, don't do this, don't do that. But it's also very important. So I'm glad you brought that third part up as well. Deepika.
Okay, sorry, can I just say something to what you just said? I know it annoys me so much that even now, New York Times and people like that will sort of publish things about our food like they've just discovered it. And when I wrote a piece on eating out in India and eating from street food, somebody actually told me that I was endangering them by suggesting that it was okay when they knew people who had ended up in hospital. But I think that the portion of the people who feel that they're going to end up in hospital from eating street food should not eat it and should not probably even travel. So I think that normalizing the kind of lives that we lead in the South, in sort of India, in Malaysia, in Singapore, and wherever we are, is so normal in our writing. There should be more of us who are writing our stories. So thank you for enabling that. Yeah.
That's wonderful. I mean, yes, you've put it beautifully in perspective. And, talking of this eating street food and, landing up in hospital, we've had situations in hotels where people have had an upset stomach after eating food at the hotel. And, when you sort of delve deeper, they say, oh, there was so much food. There was this, lal mas, and there was this, and there was this. We just had to try everything. Now, their stomachs are not used to trying everything. And, when we serve an Indian table, in most of our homes, it's never just one or two things. It's a whole repertoire of food. Even in our daily eating, we don't eat just one item. So yes, for a guest coming from across the seas, sometimes too much can also land them in hospital.
Well, I really think that there are people in this world who have the money to travel but should not travel. I was staying at the Blue Mansion in Penang in Malaysia, which is a gorgeous heritage hotel, very, very old. And of course, it is a heritage house. Somebody, while I was there, actually checked out because they saw a lizard on the wall. And they said, we are paying too much money to have lizards on our wall. If you do not expect a lizard in Southeast Asia, and that too, their tik-tikis are this small. They're not like our huge, big, dragon tik-tikis that we get here. But still, they just felt like, I cannot pay so much and live with a lizard.
No, very, very true. Very true. Deepika, do you want to, tell us a little bit about an incident or a journey that has changed your life in any way? Is there something you want us to read or something that you want to read from your book?
Yeah, I've been doing multiple kind of, events with this book. And I think one of the things that I want to say at the outset is this is my first book of non-fiction. When you're writing fiction, in a way there's a veil between you and the reader, and you can always say, oh, that's not how I think. That is not how I would say this. With non-fiction, that is not true. So when I wrote this braided essay about going to Mexico and looking at the voladores. The voladores are basically these artists who climb on a very, very tall pole and then they dance around it held by ropes. It's a very dangerous art. It's a very long-standing art. But the thing about doing the voladores act is that you have to be male to do it. Women are forbidden. So when I went to Mexico, I was again there on a residency, and I watched these voladores day after day. It struck me that the women in Mexico, just like the women in India, are still not allowed to choose their danger. We all should be allowed to say that, okay, I am willing to take on this chance, this dangerous event, because I want to live my life. Men are always around the world allowed to do that. Women are not. So what I started to do is I wrote this essay that intersected with the story of a cousin of mine, whom I call Chordi, who was very dark and dusky, and she was not allowed to choose her partner in marriage, and she kind of had a very prescribed life. And this story was very, very hard for me to write because it is true and it is personal. And just because I may have all these privileges as an Indian woman to marry who I want and go where I want, that is not true of the community. It wasn't even true of my very first cousin. So I felt like I had to write this story to give Chordi a voice. So that...
Something you want to read from there? I know it's very personal.
It is very personal, but okay, I will read, I'll read a little bit. Does everybody want to listen to an excerpt? Yes. Okay. Okay, this is on page 60, if anybody has a book, and it's titled Dance of the Flyers. Bujlish, girls are liabilities, and the faster you marry them off, the lesser your loss. Chordi's elder brother told me this the next day, his introductory word making it clear that he was delivering a universal truth. He had so normalized his misogyny that nothing he said riled me anymore. He was a bank manager, well acquainted with the spreadsheets of debit and credit columns. In that year, when Chordi whispered about her man in the bus, I had witnessed this brother coming home for a homemade lunch served by his sisters who had just returned from college and flinging the brass plate in a vicious bin because the salt was inadequate. I had fled the scene, the noise of the bell metal ringing in my ears. I told myself there was no way my gentle father would behave like that with any of the women in his family. And my brothers would not only never do something so uncivilized, but they knew my mother and I were likely to break the plate on their heads if they tried. But at the moment it happened in Kollangor, I could only think, there, but for the grace of God, go I. And I was grateful. Grateful that my father had escaped Kollangor to start earning his own living as a homeopathic doctor's assistant at the age of 14 and put himself through school, or else I would have been Chordi. That this plate thrower would, decades later, have a single son who would marry a foreigner and live in Europe with a daughter, far away from such performances of toxic masculinity, makes me think that life stops the patriarchy from perpetuating itself. Even when we, ourselves, are such terrible cowards. What a long wait for justice it is. I'll just stop there.
Beautiful, yes. Yeah. Very, very beautiful piece. And yes, when you wrote about Chordi, and I had read the novel a couple of days, I finished reading it, or the essays, and this morning when I saw the Republic Day parade, and there were contingents after contingents of all women band, all women marching contingent from the Air Force, from the BSF, and yes, there was a moment of pride I felt seeing those women donning those beautiful uniforms and carrying out their responsibility with such aplomb. But then I kept coming back to your book thinking, 2024, not much has changed for the Chordis. They still exist, isn't it? So, yes, so the voice,
Actually, sorry, just to say that I end this essay with just the fact that the rapists well, now they're back in jail again, yes. But they had been released on again a very, it was, I think, Independence Day. And I was in Mexico at that time, and I was like, we are perpetuating misogyny at such a government level that I felt I had to write this essay. So, yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up. Diya, coming to you, we were talking about this, and in the world we live today, everything is shrinking. Everything is about how little we want to see. So, because our attention spans are waning. So Instagram and, all our influencers, we don't know, we call them influencers, they can be genuine or not is not the question. But do you see that as a threat to long format writing that you do? Do you want to talk to us about that?
So I think at this point, this is something we're often asked, and this is something that a lot of young people who join our organization also talk about, which is basically the fact that they want to write long form. And one of the things we tell them after so many years of being in this profession is that you have to be able to tell a story. Whether you can tell that story in 150 characters or 250 characters for Twitter, whether you can say it via an Instagram post, whether you can say it in a short reel, whether you can write it down in 2,000 words, you have to be able to tell a good story. And to be constrained to any one form is a death knell for anyone who is a storyteller. We are all storytellers. We can't be anything but. And if we fail to adapt to new formats, this has been going on since time immemorial. Right. The earliest forms of storytelling were oral traditions. After that were the illuminated scrolls. Then came the printed book. Then the book was replaced by the digital format. The book still exists, but it coexists with the digital format, and that coexists with everything that goes on social media, and one feeds into the other. Storytelling is not going away. The formats might change, the length might change, but what you have to say doesn't need to change. And I feel you have to be nimble enough, and your story needs to be powerful enough. You need to be able to take people to places and make those places come alive. And if you can do that through a picture, through words, I think you've told a good story.
Brilliant, absolutely. Yes, absolutely fabulous. That's true. I think we're good for time, but I'm going to just touch upon a point in our lives that I think uniformly each one of us was affected, the pandemic. I don't think any of us anticipated that pandemic was going to take away a large part of our lives, and each one of us came out of it differently. Some thrived, some barely survived, some struggled. And Diya, how did travel struggle? I know hospitality struggled, and travel and hospitality go hand in hand. And it's the first thing that stops when there's anything happening in the world. Even if it does not affect us directly, people just stop traveling. And the pandemic meant the world stopped traveling. So what happened to travel writing?
When it sort of hit us at the beginning that there was no travel, and there was going to be no travel for the foreseeable future, you actually questioned yourself. You're like, what are you doing working for a travel magazine at this point in time? What are you going to write? How are you going to keep a daily website running? What are you going to put into a magazine? And in the 2 years or 1.5 years before the skies sort of opened, I think were probably our most creative years as individual writers, as a team, because we really put together all our resources, all our abilities to come up with stories and ideas that would sort of inspire people to travel when the world opened and keep the dream of travel alive, I think, more than anything else. To still keep this wonder of travel alive, the wonderful thing about places, about distant lands, to keep little bits of that alive, whether that was through talking about food, about a particular food culture from a particular place, whether that was talking about individual stories of people stuck in different parts of the world, whether that was talking about just people out on the streets who were day and night patrolling the streets during the pandemic and what their version of that city was at that point in time. It was just sort of collecting these little narratives, these little details to remind people that there was a world outside. Sometimes we would go, all of us living in Bombay and other parts of the country, we would go on walks around our own neighborhood and write these little mini travelogues about those neighborhoods, because those neighborhoods had turned into something entirely different. Yes. It was clearer, the air was not, it was fresher. There were very few people on the streets, but you'd see odd sights. You'd see that one person selling jhalmuri at the corner of a road when there was nobody there buying anything for him. And you would go up and have a conversation and wonder why this person was still there. You would see a couple who probably didn't have anywhere else to go, still sort of finding a way to find one corner by the promenade in Bombay and one corner to still sort of, have an evening of love. Yes. So you would see all these little sights, and those would be material for stories. When you looked outside, you saw spectacular sunsets, and we did photo essays by some of the greatest travel photographers in the country and elsewhere, which were essays from their window, like photo essays from their window. And they were magnificent captures of the cities, like you had never seen them before. So it was a different way of looking at travel, a different way of looking at places. And I think one of the most beautiful things we produced at that point was an entire issue of a magazine devoted to the idea of home, because this was a point when people were stuck everywhere looking for a way back home. And they didn't know where they were exactly. It was in a place suspended between sort of time, away from family, and in search of home. So we actually produced a magazine, an entire magazine devoted to everyone's idea of home, the changing notions of home. And I think that was some of the most beautiful stories where people talked about home as an idea rather than a space. And I think that's something that we're all really proud of, and that's something we all sort of carried with us, that idea of home was not limited to a place, was not limited to that one hotel room that you were stranded in, but was an idea that you carried with you, and that was what sort of kept you going through those months.
And that's hope, isn't it? That
Absolutely.
Better times are going to come. Do you want to read us something from your piece of home?
Short on time, so maybe we'll just...
Quickly, just read us a little bit and then we'll open it up to the audience.
So this is a very short bit. It's towards the end of this piece that I wrote about my idea of home, which had obviously changed over the years. I grew up in Calcutta, but I lived in many, many cities. And at the end of the day, I realized my idea of home was defined not just by me and my experiences, but the experiences of my mother, my grandmother, and their collective experiences sort of filtered down and formed my idea of home. So this is just the last bit of that essay. I first encountered Mumbai during the monsoon. The ugly detritus of the floods was offset by the magnificent expanse of the stormy seas. The city came to represent both home and homelessness for me. I went from being married to being divorced, and my life contracted into 3 suitcases. I got my first strands of grey, I fell in love again, and I learned to live alone. I realized Bombay was so large that I could be anonymous and free. It was so tough that I finally learned resilience. Today, I live in a multicultural part of the city. I have 200 odd books. That same trusty crock pot, there's a context to this belonged to my mother as well, and 1 poster. I still eat a roast on Christmas. I light diyas for Diwali. Faith was always a choice in our family. but the rituals are my inheritance. I often make mutton curry on Sundays. In my idle hours, I draw rough maps to my grandmother's grave, keeping the mango tree as a marker. My home and my story is still a work in progress. My house today might be the smallest that I've known, yet my idea of home has grown. It carries within it cities, stories, and memories. They belong to my grandmother, my mother, and me. Our homes will always be nested in each other like matryoshka dolls.
Absolutely beautiful. Yeah. So the pandemic brought out, a different kind of writer in you, and you all converted that into something beautiful, into a magazine. How charming is that? Before we close, I'm just going to read a little piece that Dipika wanted me to read from her book. It's a little personal for her, and therefore she's not venturing into reading it.
I can give the background.
Yes.
Yeah. Some of the stories in this book are actually about travel to see my family, particularly my brother. And, oh boy, I think you better read before I start crying. He passed away 3 days ago.
And the title of the story is To Keep My Brother Alive, I Will Fly 7,500 Miles for Diwali. So those of you who have this book, you're going to read it, and it's going to give you goosebumps as it gave me, and it still is. Every year since Amit's accident in 2016, I have been going back to India for Bhai Potta. Those of us living in one of these many tentacle diasporas of this global age, the Chinese, the Indian, the Filipino, the Nigerian, understand exactly what Mohsin Hamid meant when he wrote in Exit West, for when we migrate, we murder from our lives those we leave behind. So true. I refuse to murder my brother from my life, so I take a COVID test 96 hours before my flight from Chicago, then quarantine in Delhi for the 2 weeks before 16th November, which is when Bhai Potta falls in 2020. There is always hope. My brother's accident changed so many lives, reverberating in mine much harder than that single slap that changed my academic trajectory so many years ago. Last time I was with my brother reading to him, I read out loud these words by Mary Oliver. Someone I loved once gave me a box full of darkness. It took me years to understand that this too was a gift. How beautiful is that? Our deepest condolences to you, Deepika, and may you find strength in your brother and, carry on in his name. So we're going to close the session here. If any of you have, if any of you have any questions, observations, anything you want to ask our two writers, please go ahead.
Hello, good evening for this excellent session.
Thank you.
I'd like to share some of my personal experience, and I'd like to know your perspective in this regard, okay? When you go to a new place, okay, any part of the world, how you develop the relationship with that particular space, as according to my travel experience, which I have noticed, each and every place has its own consciousness, own character. When I'm going a different city, new city in any part of the world, I prefer to travel by walking, not by car, and alone, entirely alone, and to interact with the people of the atmosphere, the people of the spaces, okay? Sometimes I'm not getting people, sometimes I'm getting nature. I prefer to interact with the nature alone, okay? This is my personal perspective to develop a relationship with the new space, okay? New space entirely. So what is your perspective in this regard? Thank you.
Asking me? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah. I think when we have moved to different countries, it's been very different from just someone, let's say, going for tourism. Yes? So when you move to a different country and you know you're going to be there for 2 years or 3 years or 5 years, let's say, then you have a very different strategy. If you're there as a tourist, of course, you can wander around and just soak in the atmosphere, have a cup of coffee in a cafe, and watch the world go by, walk in nature. But when you move to a different country, and I wrote this book because it is about not just helicoptering into a place for 5 days and writing about it, but actually being there for years and writing about it. So then the strategies are very different. Some of the things that help you adapt to a place is if you have children and they go to school, you immediately have a circle of friends, of parents, of the same school children kind of thing. The other thing that has always helped me is being a writer. Wherever I've gone to, I've joined a writers group, and some of the people in Shanghai and in Amsterdam and in Singapore are still friends, even though we don't regularly see each other, but we know each other so deeply because of the things that we've shared in our writing. So that, in a way, makes me feel part of a place, even without doing anything significant. Yeah.
I'd like to add here that you've already sort of got at the heart of what most travel writers struggle to get to, which is walking around a new place, a new city, whatever small town it might be, speaking to the locals or finding that moment to commune with nature. Because in this sort of lies the heart of being a true traveler. You find these moments of hectic urgency where you're traveling from one place to the other, checking off things, seeing as much as you can, consuming as much as you can, so that you have you have everything. It's like basically you're hungry to discover this new place. And then you find those moments of quietude, of stillness, when you're sitting by a lake, you're sitting at the top of a hill, where you find those moments of quietness where you can just sort of absorb that space around you, take in and be aware of where you are. And this constant, I think, sort of dance between this stillness and this urgency and moving around is what sort of brings out the best in that place. And of course, the third part is the people, because the more you talk to the people from that area, share a meal with them, share a cup of tea with them, break bread with them, that's your biggest window into any new place that you can see. So just a little bit of research to get an idea of the lay of the land, to be able to find all these three things, that park or that lake that you can retreat to, that wonderfully crowded street that you can walk down and get a feel of that city, and those people that you can just meet all along your way. Just, I think, like some of the greatest people on travel, from Pico Iyer to Theru, everyone has said that the most beautiful thing about travel is that you leave home behind and you are open to everything around you. Your curiosity is born anew. You are a child again, because you leave your history, your prejudice behind you the moment you take that flight, that train, that bus to go to a new place. And that's when you open yourself up to everything that comes your way. And the more open you are to everything that is around you, the better traveler you are, and I think the better experience you can have as a traveler.
Somebody else out there has a question.
Hi, that was a great session. I just want to ask you, I think Diya said that when I'm walking through a place, the reader's walking with me. And I'm wondering if, you allow, or is there a lot of objectivity then when you're writing and seeing a place? And how much of yourself do you keep out of it? And how much of yourself do you put into it? I don't know if I'm framing this very well, but I'm just wondering about, when, I don't know, I hope you got the question, yeah.
No, I do get that, and that is a very, very good question, because every time we travel and then you return to write about that place, of course, as I mentioned, that you report it as you see it, but wherever you are also you, with your history, your context. In a place in the West, I am a woman of color, and I bring that into that place. That place is changed by me as much as I am changed by that place. And so I definitely bring that story. So my view of a very colonial sort of monument in England will be very different from someone who's grown up seeing that. Seeing something in London is something I've read about in history books here in Calcutta as a person from a colonized nation. My version of that monument, my telling of that story of that monument will be colored by my past, of course. But at the same time, I will not bring in a prejudice into it. I will tell it as I know it. I will tell my history as it exists. And the reader will be aware of both my history, my context, as well as that which I'm seeing. What I hope to never bring into a place wherever I go is to make the unfamiliar strange or exotic in any way. That is something I hope to always avoid. And we often go over things that we write many times over, especially when we visit places where there are Adivasi communities, places which tend to be exoticized across the northeastern states of India. We go over what we write very, very carefully to make sure that we do not bring in our biases, our ignorance into that story, but tell it in the best way possible through the voices of the people we have met, through expert-led sort of opinions on those places rather than our own, because they have no business being in that place.
I think.
Hi, Priyanka, Deepika knows me. So it's more like observation. Not everybody is fortunate enough to travel. There are people like me who are super lazy and don't like to travel much also. Please ignore us. These pieces of writing, this is our window to the world. So it's more like a thank you. I grew up reading National Geography. I have read a little bit of Deepika's. I have read multiple travel-related books. I even read those travel guides just to familiarize myself with a place, because I know I'm not someone who is going to travel for 36 hours to be somewhere for only 20 hours. I will not. I will prefer my comfortable hotel room without the lizard. So these pieces, these places of these heritage hotels, these small communities, these tribals, this is our window to the world, where we don't go and visit them. There are people like us who exist who don't travel, who don't like to travel much. Thank you.
Thank you, Priyanka. Yeah, and that's also good. That's very good. You're saving the planet.
And that's also why it is the responsibility of writers, such as Diya, to make sure that that window is the true window. It's not a colored window with biases and with personal nuances in the sense. And those windows are, to reach out to people as yourself, Priyanka, so that you can see, what the world is all about. So, yes, you have something to say.
I just want to say thank you, Priyanka. Even if you don't like traveling, the fact that you still read about travel, thank you. We need more people like you.
So thank you so much for joining us this evening. It's not such a chilly evening as we expected it to be. Thank you, Deepika. Thank you, Diya, for being such wonderful participants. And I have thoroughly enjoyed reading your book, and I think I'm hungry for more, so I shall get hold of some more. And Diya, I've always read your pieces in the Condé Nast and in Mint Lounge. So yes, continue to inspire us. Keep writing, and thank you to the Tata Steel Kolkata Lit Meet for bringing such wonderful forums together. Thank you.
Thank you, Seema. Yeah.
Thank you, Seema. Thank you. Thank you very much. When I thought about this session, I imagined it in a certain way, and it's a curator's delight when the session exceeds even those hopes. So thank you, Dipika. Thank you, Diya. And thank you, Seema, for a wonderful job. So we have a small tea laid out for you, so do partake of it before we come back for our session, All the World's a Stage.